Great. Well, why don't we get started? Chris, can you hear me still?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So we are just so pleased that you're here joining us. I will give just a very brief introduction here. Actually, I realized that they sent me some good text for you for your introduction that I should pull up. 1 second. Great. So as you all know, this is the second of 3 sessions that we're doing on the criminal justice system and policy, and this is by far the most exciting and going to be the most interesting, and it is because we're joined by a truly remarkable and extraordinary person, Chris Wilson, who is the author of the book that you all have read. And while Chris is at the moment in New York, we are going to figure out a time for him to be here and to sign copies of your book. So keep posted, keep your eyes peeled on the there it is on your email for when he will be around. I know that his story is really remarkable, and he'll be able to tell a little bit about it. I'm going to ask him a few questions, and then we'll have an opportunity for questions from the audience. We're going to ask you to come up, line up over there, and then when people ask questions, he'll be able to see you if you step in front. I'll just say that right now, Chris lives in Baltimore City, is the owner and founder of the Barclay Investment Corporation, which is a multi-service social enterprise specializing in residential and commercial contracting. Barclay works closely with local workforce and social service providers to connect unemployed Baltimore City residents with clients who are in need of a number of services. His other business ventures include the House of Da Vinci, a high-end furniture restoration and design company, and Master Plan Productions, a social impact content development company. And I should say he is an incredibly talented artist as well. So please join me in welcoming Chris to the class virtually.
Thank you.
So, Chris, I want to say that the book has, affected me and many people here who have written me notes about the book, and it's in part. What I think is extraordinary about it is, believe it or not just your personal story. If it were a book just about your personal story, it would be a great book. But it's also about your growing awareness of the injustice that affects society more broadly, about mass incarceration, about what can be done, not just for people to follow narrowly in your footsteps, but also to improve the system. And it's a book about your transformation personally, but also your transformation in your understanding and in your advocacy. And I wanted to just give you a few minutes just to talk a little bit about, from your perspective, how that transformation came about, how you began to see this not just as things affecting you, but things affecting, many more people.
Right. Well, so for me, it was interesting. I came up with the idea that I wanted to write a book when I was 19, sentenced to a life sentence in prison. And I knew at that moment I had been through so many things in my life, mostly like bad things, but I knew that I was a good person. I knew in my heart that I was intelligent. I knew that I just never really applied myself. And so back then I thought about imagining my story, having survived all the stuff that I had. If I educated myself, if I was able to get out and be successful, and not only just do things for myself, but also help people around me be successful and people in my community. And so when I dreamed up of that idea, that's when I decided to write everything up. And then it was a lot of pressure. I shared it with, my grandmother, I shared it with the judge, and, people, had to hold me accountable. And so I worked really hard for over a decade. And then the toughest part was coming home, moving to Baltimore and being able to execute my plan. And so, I've been home 7 years now. It's very, very difficult and challenging. I've been through like so many things, including like 3 attempts against my life in Baltimore, just like random stuff. But it's allowed me to help literally hundreds of people in my city. And so in the book finally being published was just something that was just very beautiful. Like I hope, like my goal was to tell my story with the hopes of helping people, like one, understand like the plight, especially young Black men growing up in tough neighborhoods, the plight of people navigating the criminal justice system, but also like the plight of a social entrepreneur or just someone who just wants to make a difference in the world and advocate on the behalf of other people. And so I hope that, people come up with their own master plans or even just like have a better understanding and help the other Chris's in the world. Man, I made it this far because a handful of people mentored me and supported me. And so I just hope that the book encourages other people to just step up and try to make the world a little better than it was yesterday.
Now, thank you. Part of what the book is seeking to do is to make it easier for people to accomplish what you accomplished, Right. And what do you, from your perspective, what are the kinds of things that need to be done to make it easier for more people to, really be able to reestablish themselves?
I believe with all my heart, like one of the most important things that a person can do is to educate themselves. And so, there was times where I was in prison and I would read like the Wall Street Journal with my cell buddy, and we would follow like different entrepreneurs and folks in the world. And it was like simple stuff that people like invented or came up with that allowed them to, make a ton of money and like just do like, all kinds of stuff in the world. And I think like that's the separation. It's access to like education, and that's something no one can ever take from you. And so that's one of the things I think can really like make a difference is education. And so I've been doing a lot of advocacy work, advocating on the behalf of like federal Pell Grants and prison education. I've actually been funding stuff through my foundation, but like that's something, and it's been proven, the data supports that even a little bit of college or even a little bit of vocational education reduces recidivism.
And how available is that? Like, are we at 2% of available or 80% of available, or how big is that mountain to climb to get education?
So it fluctuates. I know at a certain point when Obama was in office, he reenacted the federal Pell Grant, and it was kind of like temporarily available. And I guess the way that works is like it's federal money that's applied, and a certain percentage of that money trickles down on the state level and supports like education behind the fence. But it's politically sensitive because like some folks, folks would say, well, I pay all this money to go to Johns Hopkins like every year. Like, why should someone get a free education behind the fence? I work hard and like I got student loans and I'm in debt. And that's a fair argument. But the flip side is, taxpayers are paying for people to be incarcerated anyway. And like if someone breaks into your car and like takes your radio out your car, they should be punished and maybe they should do some jail time. But while they're away and while you're paying for it, you don't want them to become a smarter like criminal, right? And learn how to like disarm your alarm in your house and come back. You want them like to figure out what led them to prison, get some therapy, educate themselves, and come out. And instead of like breaking into your car, maybe they start like a mechanic business or do something like different. And so I just think we get a better return when we invest in education, particularly behind the fence.
Great. Here's something from your book. I'm going to read it. You said, "Parole is brutal. Our system is not set up for men and women released from prison to succeed. It's actually set up for them to fail." I'm not sure that's intentional. I think it's the result of a lot of small decisions that piled up over the years. But one thing is certain: society turned its back on its returning citizens long ago. Now, one of the things we heard a couple weeks ago from a lecture here was that one of the main reasons that people are incarcerated isn't the original crime, it's the violation of probation. Can you talk about how you saw that issue, how that issue dawned on you, either behind bars or after you've left?
Right, and so it's unfortunate, but the American prison system has turned itself into a business. We can even look at like specifically like the state of Maryland. And we have all these private companies who come in and charge for like commissary and phone calls, all this stuff, and they're making money. And their carrot is they will give kickbacks to the prisons. They lobby more than almost anyone, except maybe the pharmaceutical companies, towards politicians. And so that being said, beds have to be filled. And so a person will get out of prison and out on parole or probation, and their parole officer will say, well, you got to get a job. You have to do this. You have to take 2 urinalysis a week, and you got to come check in twice a week. And so, like, how do you get a job and you have to leave work twice a week to get a urinalysis? Also pay for the urinalysis, $40 a pop, right? And all these things and hoops that you have to jump through. And if you're late, if you miss one thing, you go back to prison. And so a majority of folks who recidivate is having to jump through all of these hoops. Like, you got to take 2 urinalysis. You got to get a job. By the way, it's almost impossible, like, to get like a decent job having a criminal background. You got to slay a dragon. You got to be able to jump over this. It's all these things that you have to do that makes it impossible. And you end up going back to prison, which is exactly what they want, because it's a business.
What's that like for the people who are going through that kind of merry-go-round? I mean, how does that, impact them?
Uh-oh. Well, what it's like is insanely frustrating. And for example, especially in Baltimore, where there's so many people who have went through this process of being violated multiple times. And like what happens, for example, I do gang mediation, and I go into tough neighborhoods and try to convince people like to lay their guns down. I may like hire some of these folks and get them to, take a different path in life. But like, imagine how it feels, take a young man, 24 years old, 2 children, maybe he's been to prison 2 or 3 times, and he's trying his best to get a decent job, which is almost impossible. He has his probation officer on his back, but he has to provide for his family. And the society makes it so difficult for that person to reacclimate back into society that what do? Like, they go back to what they know. Maybe they deal drugs, or maybe they just try to figure out how they can take care of their family. And, I'm not saying that's right, but we should make the path of redemption and reacclimating back into society much better. It should make it more easier for that. It's better for all of us.
Now, you mentioned that you've been helping a lot of people as they get out, and so you're trying to help people break that cycle.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about what that's like and the kinds of things that you have to do for that to be successful?
Right. And so my companies, I started out of frustration. I was doing workforce development and community organizing in central Baltimore in the Barclay neighborhood. And I would see men and women who would be denied job opportunities just because of maybe a criminal conviction they had 20 years before that. And so I decided to start companies and employ these folks to give them like an opportunity to help them like move up in the world and earn an honest living. And besides that, I've been going down to Annapolis and Capitol Hill to advocate towards policies that help this particular population. But I will say it's been very, very difficult. And I'm sure everyone in the room will all agree that the criminal justice system is broken, but that depends on who you ask. And some people think that the system is working perfectly fine, particularly, targeting people of color. It's making money, it's creating jobs. And some people think it's working fine. It's unfortunate.
So you wrote also about the attitudes that people have about people who have been incarcerated. And that's part of this issue of probation and cycling in and out. And what you said was, we don't like returning citizens, period. We don't believe in redemption. We don't want so-called ex-cons to vote. We don't want them to have good jobs. We don't want them to succeed, because if they succeed, that means they aren't being punished enough. So we set up systems to make success hard and blame them for their failure. We push them back into prison in hundreds of small but significant ways, then claim data shows returning citizens are career criminals, and use that claim to make the system even worse. So, underlying these policy failures is a fundamental attitude problem, which is in part, as you said, I think related to racism, and in part related to other biases that people have. How have you experienced that, and what's your thinking about how that can be changed? How as you're fighting for policies, you're sort of confronting that, I'm sure. So how do you do that?
So I mean, it's easy to demonize people when they commit crimes, right? Every time I go down to like Annapolis or on Capitol Hill, there's always like some senator or some committee member that gives an example of some, mother who was like brutally like attacked and like stabbed or something like that. And like, I get it, right? But I think it's important for us to look at the whole picture when we think about the criminal justice system and folks behind the fence. And, we look at like someone who does something like that. It's easy to call that person like a monster, but almost, all of the time, like these victimizers usually start out as victims. And so we look at like how they brought up, being abused in their house, not getting like proper education, growing up in tough neighborhoods, experiencing like trauma. As a society, America doesn't really do a lot of preemptive, like, therapy. Like if you go through stuff, it's usually a person goes through all of these traumatic experiences, gets bullied at school, maybe have a family member that's like, addicted to drugs. And then eventually, like, they break and then they end up hurting someone else. Like, we should be more preemptive in applying services, especially for our young people who brains aren't developed. They can't comprehend like some of these things that they're going through. And, we'll take a child and send them away for the rest of their life. And so I think just as a society, we got to do better. And I'm not saying that some people don't deserve to be in prison. Like, I grew up in prison, and I can tell you there's a small percentage of people that belong in there. But most of the folks in there deserve a second chance, or their lives are redeemable, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. And how have you, as you've taken that message in these so many different ways around, how has that been received? What surprised you, or what's been the challenge or the opportunity?
Yeah, I think the thing that surprised me the most is the amount of letters and emails that I receive from like mothers, grandmothers who have loved ones incarcerated, young people, particularly in Baltimore, like the middle schools and high schools, and people who have, tell me things like, thanks for like not forgetting about us, or like explaining to the world like what we have to go through. Or like myself, like having to sleep on the floor at night often because like bullets would zip through my house. And, we would call the police. They wouldn't show up in our neighborhood. And I think situations like that, it's hard for people to comprehend how it's like to grow up like that. And it's easy for people to say, well, you should lock these folks up or whatever. But some people in America are subjected to different circumstances, and they shouldn't be. And so I try to do as much as possible of telling our story, also trying to come up with ways to, I write about Plato's allegory of the cave, and I speak about that often. But I feel like it's my goal to try to lead people out of that figurative cave and show them there's a better way, to live your life.
Well, you're really doing a tremendous amount. Personally, it's hard to think of anybody in this area who has taken that message to so many different places. I'm curious, when you said you've been to Annapolis and Capitol Hill, is there any particular thing that is on your mind when you're going, any particular piece of legislation or policy idea?
Yes. Yeah, so there was a bill, and this is crazy. Check this out. So this was the bill that we were trying to get passed that said, so in the state of Maryland, there are 300 people who were juveniles and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. So I sat down alongside a few other folks, and we worked on some legislation. This included the ACLU. I think I said that acronym right. But and the bill said that if a person who was a juvenile when charged and sentenced to life, if they serve 15 years with good behavior, they should at least be considered for parole. And they shot it down. And even though, it's still it's unconstitutional. It says they should have parole. And I've met with folks down in Annapolis behind closed doors, and it's like, we think it's a good deal. And I was like, this would incentivize people to educate themselves, good behavior and stuff like that. It should at least be considered. They shot it down. And they was like, no way. And so it's just like, they don't make it easy for you to get out of prison or just turn your life around. And so that's why I write about this, talk about the system is stacked against us. And so it's just unfortunate. And it's rooted in racism.
And why would they say they couldn't do it if they thought it was a good idea?
It's so crazy. They would say stuff like, well, the chair isn't going to vote for it, and that person over there isn't going to vote. And we usually vote according to how they vote. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
How does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I watched it happen more than once.
Yeah.
And they would give these scenarios and say, well, what about that mother that happened? It was like, I understand that, right? And that's unfortunate. And my heart goes out to that family. But what about the 300 people? What about the 300 families? And we're paying for this, by the way. Taxpayers. It's tons of money. Doesn't make sense.
Wow. Terrific. Well, I want to make sure we have a good amount of time here for questions. What I'll ask is maybe people who are interested in asking questions just to come and line up over here on this side, and then we'll call you up to go in front of the camera and ask the question. I think we've practiced the sound. I want to pause and thank Ryan for all your help here.
Oh yeah,
He's taking pictures.
Thanks,
and getting it all set up. But I know this is not a shy group, so you should please come on up here.
Don't be shy, guys.
I'd like to ask you, while we have a second, for you to talk for a second about the art you've done that is related to this topic and around Baltimore, awesome. Or around any aspect of your art, but certainly I'm very familiar with some of it.
Right. So about 2 years ago, I started painting. As it was more therapeutic for me, cathartic, to paint. And I remember when I first started painting, a guy, Jeffrey Kent, who was a Baltimore-based artist who was mentoring me, and he told me that art should mean something. Think about stuff that you care about. And he was like, it should look good too. And think about the stories that you can tell through art. And so I remember I started painting, and my first piece actually was titled Solitary Confinement is Torture. And I painted on this palette. And he said, you should be able to defend what your art is about. So I started doing research, and I discovered that in the US, there's 80,000 men, women, and children in the state level who are subjected to solitary confinement, which is deemed by everyone as torture. And so how do you expect a person, myself, I've been in solitary confinement for 117 days, but how do you expect people to reacclimate if we're torturing our people? And so I made this piece that was in a few shows, and actually this piece sold 2 months ago for $21,000, which I'm happy about. Yeah, so it's been pretty good.
Great. Why don't you go in front and you stand on the doily? Let's see if that works. And if you can introduce yourself to Chris and then ask your question.
Hi, my name is...
But speak very loudly.
Okay. My name is Danny. I'm an
How you doing, Danny?
Thank you so much for being here today, even from New York. I really enjoyed the book. As an MPH student and as someone who works internationally, I'm actually really interested in what your experience was in terms of access to healthcare within the prison system. It's something that recently working in places like Libya, it's a really big challenge, not just to get education for inmates, but also, what kind of policies would you say are relevant in the US system that we should be looking to advocate for?
Right. So I'm not going to sugarcoat this one. So you would have to be somewhat crazy to subject yourself to the medical system behind the fence. And honestly, there was a lot of they bid these contracts out to these companies, and so folks who are just like starting now, they pretty much experimental medicine and stuff like that, especially like with the psychotherapy medications. Like, so they experiment a lot with folks, at least in the prison that I was in Patuxent. But very, very subpar medical treatment behind the fence. And especially like, who's going to advocate for prisoners, right? Like, you know, for the most part, who cares, right? People are locked up, right? They should be lucky to get anything. But it was horrible. It's horrible. And I hope that, like, my experience in the prison that I was in, that it's not like that in other prisons. But it was just very bad. And so I just try to just take care of myself and just not go if I can help it.
Thanks. Great. Go ahead, introduce yourself.
Hey, Chris, thank you so much for meeting with us. I'm Eric, I'm a medical student from New York and a full-time student in the program.
Just speak up.
Sure, sorry. So, sort of a follow-up to that question, you mentioned a lot about how therapy was helpful for you in prison, and also you went after the halfway house when you were sent back to prison, you spent some time in the mental health ward, and you talked a lot about the people in that ward. I'm curious if you could just comment a little bit about that and like what you think could be done to change that, because it sounded like it was really bad.
I think, you know how Congress and government officials have been popping up on these, I call them like concentration camps for like the immigrants, stuff on the borders. And I know some people who have visited these spaces. They should do that in prisons, just so you can see how crazy it is. I wrote about this, like when they sent me back to prison for no reason. And they put me there, and it was unimaginable things that I saw there. People screaming and people like, it was insane. And so, but this happens a lot in prison, and oftentimes folks are behind the fence are suffering from mental health illnesses, especially people that we see like around Baltimore and not getting treatment. And so that's something, you know, we should have more people going and visit these prisons so you can see like the conditions. It's horrible.
Thank you.
Great. It's a very important issue of mental health policy, how to help keep people who are really seriously mentally ill out of prison, because unfortunately in a lot of places, those by default are where most people with serious mental illness wind up. And very interesting policy issues there. Come on.
Yeah.
Hello. Can you see me? All right.
Yep. Just
Hi.
speak up real.
Okay. My name's Arisa. I'm a medical student from Indianapolis and a full-time MPH student here. I was wanting to ask about this particular quote. When you start from a place like Division Avenue, life's fragile. You don't get to make mistakes because you don't have a safety net. And that's literally right before kind of everything went down. And you talked about your mom and falling in love with the wrong man. Could you speak more to the importance of a safety net in preventing a slew of life events? Yeah.
Right. So I guess what I was trying to convey is like some people in America, like they grow up, they have both of their parents. They live in a decent neighborhood. They get access to education, and they have like, you know, their safety net. They have friends, you know, family members who support them, and they can afford maybe like to make a few mistakes or whatever, even like get arrested once or twice or whatever, smoking pot or like, I don't know, driving without a license or something like that. Like they can recover from that. But if you take like someone like that and then compare them to someone like who lives on Division Avenue, which I visited like recently, you can't afford to make mistakes like that. Even something that's like getting pulled over or something, you could be killed by the police officer. Like, you know, it's all kinds of things that can happen. Maybe like, you know, your family members, you get arrested and like there is no bond to money to bond you out of prison or jail, or money for attorneys or to get your record expunged and stuff like that. And so the simplest things that maybe someone coming from a different environment could recover from, people in communities like Division Avenue, they can't recover from stuff like that. And oftentimes it costs them their life. Like I was there a few weeks ago to visit my grandmother, who's like 94 and still sharp as a whistle. But someone was just killed on the block. And she just was like, hey, that's just how it is around here. And it's unfortunate, but it's important for people, for all of us to understand that what I was trying to convey in that message about that safety net. Like, some people are privileged to have it, but a lot of people don't have a net. They can't afford to make mistakes.
Thank you so much.
Great. All right, following up on that great question, are there, such a big challenge, are there particular parts to that you think, are ripe for, changing? Certainly reforming police departments would be on that list.
Right.
What other things could build that safety net back for people?
I think, at least like using my own story as an example, I think it would be important for our educators, our teachers, especially growing up, elementary school, middle school, and high school, and even college, to be able, I guess, to identify maybe our young people who are maybe suffering from post-traumatic stress and stuff like that. I'm just thinking, having visited dozens and dozens of schools in Baltimore City recently, and having children come up to me and tell me like their friend was just gunned down like a few days before. And like, these are children that are in class that like not paying attention, can't focus. Usually it's something that's happening at home. And so I would love to see our teachers be more aware of their students who may be suffering through stuff and getting them the proper like help. That would be one way.
Great, thank you.
Hi, Chris. Thank you so much for speaking with us. My name's Mihir. I'm an MPH student. I'm also a surgery resident interested in the intersection of racism and poverty and violence. Your book was super inspirational and made me cry a lot.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
No. In a good way, and so my question is, like, your book basically describes how the system, it's so messed up and racist and problematic at every step, from sentencing to trying to get a sentence hearing and reduction, to parole, to your experience in the halfway house, to the very kind of random fate that you misspelled your middle name and how that protected you. Like, all these things, right?
I'm so happy about that, by the way, too.
And so my question's about reform versus abolition. Like, do you think it's possible to reform every step through lobbying, through legislation of this very broken system? Or do we need to reimagine? Do we need to like sit down and think from scratch? Like, what does rehabilitation, what does kind of like reintegration look like from the beginning? I don't know if that's even something that's possible. What you think about that?
That's a very deep question, right? I'll try to answer it. So personally, I would say that we should like reimagine how we operate the system, but that's not really like practical. I was actually debating with this attorney last night for a few hours about this like very thing. And, we live in America, right? And, unfortunately we have a very eccentric president. And I'm being nice, but we got to think of like methods that are practical, that make sense, right? And so, I mean, there are all kinds of things that we can like approach. Big ships turn slow, as we know, but there's things that we can implement that could like steady turn this system around in a positive way. And I think now is more of a better time than any time. We have people like Republicans and Democrats and all kinds of folks who agree that the system like isn't working. And so I think we have to use this momentum to start incrementally like changing like some of our policies. And like, I'm optimistic. I think that especially with our crazy president, I think it's going to incentivize people to step up to run for office, to really like try to make a difference in this country. Like, we have to do this.
Great. Any thoughts on the recent back and forth around Baltimore? Yes.
Yeah, it's it's just ridiculous. And Congressman Cummings and his wife, like they're close friends of mine. I live in his district. I just think it's stupid, and it's actually like embarrassing too, like for the world to have like a president talk down about one of his own like cities. Like I don't really get that, but you know, us Baltimoreans, like we're very tough, and so like that I don't think that fazed any of us, and so you know. I actually like the Baltimore Sun's response to it, by the way, today. I posted that on my Facebook page.
Yeah. Excellent. I tweeted it, so
Yeah,
I know
that's
what that's
great.
like. Okay, so go ahead, come up a little closer and
Sure.
just speak loudly.
Hi, my name's Stephanie, and I'm an OBGYN from New York. I kind of came into this program expecting to focus on maternal health, but this book kind of brought some things that I've thought about in the periphery to the forefront, and as someone whose career might not necessarily focus on criminal justice reform, do you have any tips on how I'm supposed to be active in this? You know, because my career isn't necessarily 9 to 5 going to be focusing on this, but I feel like after reading this book, you can't really ignore some of these topics. What kind of advocacy should I be pursuing?
That's a good question. And so what I think is, you know, oftentimes like when we're around our friends and like topics come up, I think especially like all of you guys having like taken this class and being more knowledgeable about like this issue and like what's going on in America, I think it makes sense for us to speak out, even in these conversations about what's really going on, because it's easy for people to look at the news and just like, or have an opinion from like, you know, their sofa, but you guys are more in depth. You guys are doing research on it. You guys are like getting to the bottom of these issues. And the other thing is we got to step up and like vote and hold our political leaders accountable. So we can sit in the classroom and we can talk about how this is messed up and this is a problem. But like if we look at Baltimore, like we have an insanely low voter turnout rate. Like I mean, we everyone like knows what problems are in the city, but like why isn't it that more people aren't turning out like to vote or hold our political leaders accountable? Like that's something like that we got to do. We can't just complain about like the world. We got to step up, and if not, you got to run for office, but you got to just like show up. And so that's one of the things that I think we should definitely do, especially in Baltimore with all of our challenges.
You know, one of the, you're saying that just reminded me that from where I'm standing right now, Congressman Elijah Cummings gave one of the most tremendously inspiring talks to students, faculty, others, community members who were here after the unrest and uprising. That was recorded, so we can send a link around, but it was a very, very, very similar kind of message.
Yeah, awesome guy. He was out there on the front line, and just another thing. So he recently, last year, he brought a painting that I did, and he was in the painting, like on the front line, which hangs over his desk in his office in DC, which I'm proud of.
Hi, Chris. I'm Kristen. I'm about to be a little controversial here, so I'm also with the MPH program. I'm also a clinical psychology student, PhD, and I'm also a combat veteran. And so with that, I've done a little bit of work looking at the intersectionality between the experience between combat veterans and people who are in prison. And there's a large similarity, and like I said, it's a little controversial from both points, but I won't go into all of them. But with that, wondering what your opinions are about, or if you've looked into any reintegration programs that have been used with veterans, and those aren't actually working really well either in terms of the suicide rate and everything, because I think this is also part of it. I think it goes also beyond race, but also socioeconomic status. And you look at the people who join the military too; they're not the wealthy people. And there's definitely some disparities in especially mental health, which is my specialty. But just wondering if what your opinion is on bridging that gap between the veterans and ex-prisoners.
So this was like serendipity, like as you brought this question up. So I'm in New York doing an art residency now. And the studio is not too far from me. I'm actually working on a big painting that's exactly about combat veterans and their experience with PTSD. And so it's on my Instagram page too, Chris Wilson Baltimore, if anyone wants to see it. So I'll post it.
We'll check it out.
But so here's the thing, right? So I was in Baltimore not too long ago, and this I think he was Army veteran. Like he walked up, he was homeless. He still had like his jacket on. He had like some medals and stuff, and he was just like trying to get something to eat. And I was shocked, and I was like. And he was like, yeah, I did 2 tours. And like my sister was in the military. My brothers, they all did tours over the Middle East and stuff. And I was like, how'd you end up out here? What happened, man? Like you won all these medals and stuff. And he was like, man, life is just like messed up. And it's like, we see this all over the place, right? And, you know, my personal opinion, I don't think we do enough to support our veterans. And it's similar to even folks in these tough communities who also like experience post-traumatic like stress due to like, you know, combat, which is, you know, very like the same. But America doesn't react well to like taking care of folks in therapy and providing like those services. Like we're quick to like send folks into like, you know, a combat zone, or we're quick to police a neighborhood and kick down doors. And like children are seeing all this stuff and they're being like traumatized, and we expect people like to be okay. And I think we should be talking more about post-traumatic stress disorder in our veterans, and especially like people in like tough neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. And so I just think like hopefully like you continue that conversation and keep bringing that up so we can address it more.
Thank you.
Great. I think we're going to have four more questions here. So here we
Okay.
go.
Hi, Chris. My name is Janice. I'm good. I'm in the MPH program, and I'm from Ghana. So there's usually this perception in immigrant communities, especially with Black immigrants, at least I can speak for the African community, that African Americans just don't do enough for themselves. They often think that, like, you know, they come in here and they're able to like excel. And it's like, oh, you have all these opportunities as well, but you don't. I don't know. Have you had any interactions like that with with Africans or other immigrant communities? And what would your message be to them?
Can you restate your question too a little bit so I can speak up just a little bit, please?
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So with immigrant communities, there's usually the perception that like African Americans just don't do enough to like improve themselves, especially with like Africans that I've spoken to. What is your message to them? And have you like had that kind of encounter where they're saying you're just not doing enough?
So that's interesting. So when I was incarcerated, there was an influx of African immigrants from Nigeria, and they were all becoming like correctional officers in prison. And a lot of them, I eventually, like over the years, I became like close, like with a lot of them. I even like learned some of the language, like Yoruba, which was fun. But like they would tell us, like they would treat us, like the Black people in prison, they would treat us a little worse. And they would say like, we work so hard to get over here in America, and here you guys like not taking advantage of education opportunities or whatever. You got yourself locked up, and you just have no idea how hard we work like to get over here. And it was strange because, you know, we all like look the same. We all come from like the same place, and folks in the prison would dislike the African correctional officers, right? And so I just thought that was like very strange. But, you know, I believe that, you know, most people, and I've had the pleasure like to travel around the world over the past like year and a half to 20 countries. And I do believe like a lot of people have a view on America, and I think it's like a legit view that, you know, it's still like a land of like opportunity. And that's why I say like it's healthy for folks to travel and spend time with folks outside of America. So it makes you appreciate what we have when we get here and make you want to work really hard to be successful. That's it. I hope I answered your question.
Great.
I tried.
Thank you. And you should come to Ghana.
All right.
Hi, Chris. My name is Rosetta Stav, and I'm a surgical resident as well as a full-time MPH student. Thank you so much for your book, as well as speaking with us this morning. In your book, you mentioned Dr. Carter, how she is an African-American therapist, and how, like, when you left Patuxent, she said, "Be good out there, inmate Wilson. Always remember you are the property of the state of Maryland." How did you feel about that when she said that to you, and how do you feel about those words now?
So that was very painful. I journaled when she told me that. I put it in my journal. It was so painful for many reasons for her to say that. And I didn't go in depth on that comment in the book, but it was painful because here was like a grandmotherly type, very intelligent, and what they were doing to us in prison, the way they were treating us was wrong. But she wouldn't speak out or speak against it, right? And so that's what made it painful. And for her to tell me like that I'm the property of the state, and I get what she meant, but like it was just so painful for it to come from her. And like her and I are like still good friends, and I go back into the prison and I talk now. I'm still waiting for her to ask me about that comment, right? I'm a little nervous about it, but but yeah, it's just painful. And I guess she was just trying to remind me that, like, you know, you're still Black, it's still America, and it's still going to be very difficult for you. So just remember where and who you are. And, you know, I'm stubborn. I choose to believe that, like, my life can be much better than just, like, you know, being worried about what Uncle Sam will do to me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Chris. My name's Leah. I'm a pediatrician from Canada. I'm also in the MPH program. You talk a lot about being in the cave, and in the ER, when I see kids who are acting up in school or who look like they're in the cave, we have such fleeting interactions with them. And this might be a naive question, but in those interactions, is there anything anyone could have said to you that could have helped at least like plant a seed? Because every word is precious in the ER. And so I wonder if there's anything that anyone could have ever said to you that could have started planting a seed.
I mean, that's a deep question. I think it would have been helpful if someone would have just asked to listen to like what I was going on. Oftentimes, young people, especially, feel like people just don't understand. Even like my parents, like, you know, we don't always know like what our young people are going through. And so I would have found it helpful just for my mom or, you know, my school counselors to just say like, well, what's going on? And just sit down and listen, and no judgment or anything, and just like, let me talk. And so I kept everything like bottled up, like most young people I know, until I ended up like lashing out and getting arrested. But like, it'd be helpful, I believe, to like sit down with our young people and say like, what's going on? And let's just talk, and just don't judge, and just let them like, what's going on in your life? Just let them speak, give them a voice. Because oftentimes we feel like, you know, we're not being heard.
Thank you.
Hi, Chris. My name's Kate. I am a hopeful professor and a very, very hopeful dean. And
Nice.
Educators, I know, have a lot of impact on their students, especially the students who might not have had access to a solid foundation in formal education. You were a wonderful self-advocate for yourself to the dean of the University of Baltimore and to your professors. But is there anything that professors and educators in general can do to make themselves appear more open, to encourage returning citizens, to discuss any troubles they might be having with their education more than you might see?
Right. I like that question because I just had a few flashbacks to some of my professors at University of Baltimore. I believe like universities are like the nexus of like information and like knowledge, and like that's the place, you know, where like ideas are like hatched. But my professors at the University of Baltimore, and actually some professors at Johns Hopkins also kind of stepped in, and they're still in my life now and kind of advised me. But they pushed me, and they didn't look at my situation and my background, and they didn't judge me. My professors would tell me stuff they would lock the classroom door sometimes, and use profanity and just say stuff like, don't you parrot back information that you read in the book or a case study. You learn this stuff. I want you to get out there and I want you to do it. And they would be sometimes they would say, class is over. Get up right now and go out and find your first follower. Get up right now and go do this stuff. And it's that professors didn't have to do that. They could just read some slides and give me some reports and stuff like that and go do my homework. But my professors actually believed in me. The dean actually believed in me, and they would push me, go out and do it and be successful. Or I would get emails and text messages, holding me accountable. And I think professors, they can do that when they see potential in their students. They should push the students, and vice versa. You're paying for your education. So if your professors aren't demanding your education that you want, and so if your professor's not delivering, say, listen, I don't want to read these boring slides. Teach me some real stuff. Let's get down to it. And so it goes back and forth.
Great, thank you. I think we've got 2 bonus questions. I told you 4 more, but we're going to take them both at the same time.
Let's do it.
But both at the same time. So why don't you ask your question and introduce yourself, and then we'll go to the last one.
Thank you for talking to us today. My name is Fatma, and I'm a doctor from Pakistan. My question was that during this entire ordeal of yours, what kept you going? You may have a plan, but there's something that has to keep you going to stick to it. And what was your prime motivation in the face of all the adversity that you were facing? And if you were to leave one advice to us that could help us in our own lives, because I feel a lot of people go through a lot, but for some of us, a pinprick could be a huge thing, right? So if you were to advise one thing, if you were to give us one piece of advice, what would that be?
Great. And one more question.
Got it. All right.
Hold on.
So I want to be out of. Okay.
Let's get the other one, Chris, and then we'll go. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Bernstein.
Okay.
Actually, my question goes along with hers. I was struck by the fact that even when you had a master plan, you still faced all these people telling you, no, aim lower. Why are you trying to go that high?
Right.
And how do we as a society stop telling that to our young people, particularly people of color, that they need to aim lower in life? How can we elevate ourselves that way?
Got it. Okay. All right. So first question, I would say that everyone should have their own master plan. So, and that means writing it down and thinking about, I see this a lot in books, what's your end game? Think about, when I was 19, I was thinking about, what are people going to say about me when I'm 40? What kind of person am I going to be, right? So I think we all should think about that, right? And then we work backwards. It's okay, if I want to be the successful entrepreneur that travels the world and does all these different things or whatever, what do I need to do in order to make that happen, right? And so you write it down, and then you take that master plan and then you share it with a few people and give them the power to hold you accountable. So if you're saying, look, I'll go to college, I need to graduate from Johns Hopkins, this stuff like that, and you share that plan with someone. I shared it with my grandmother because everyone listens to grandma. So my grandma would be why you not working towards this? And why you not doing this? And, I didn't want to let my grandmother down. And so that's the recommendation I would have for the first question. Second question, I would say it's very important, particularly in communities of color, for people to see people who look like them, who come from where they come from, that are successful. And so with this book launch, it's being turned into a movie too, by the way. I don't know if you guys know, a feature film, which is awesome. It's important, especially for our young people, to see people and for us to go back and let our young people know that they can be successful. Oftentimes, people, especially folks who have been impacted by the criminal justice system, say you should just settle for a job, or you should be able, just fly under the radar. No, you can be your own boss. You can travel the world. You can do whatever you want to do if you work hard towards it. And so I think we need to start encouraging people to believe that they can be successful. And so that's what I've been trying to do by telling my story, by writing this book.
Great. Well, Chris, this has just been such a great time, and the technology has worked great. We feel like you're right here with us. Any final thoughts? As this is a class about trying to change the system. I mean, that's what policy is. And any final thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think about this like every day, and I guess like at the end of the day, if you want it done, then you probably have to do it. If you want it done right, you probably got to do it yourself. And so we just got to show up. Especially, I mean, I can't wait to get back to Baltimore. I come back later on tonight. It's like we just got to show up. Folks complain, folks tweet, and they do stuff from like the comforts of their home. I think the future is going to be changed by people like us who step up, who's going to protest, who's going to run for office, who's going to cast their vote. And we just got to keep doing it. We got to be consistent, and we got to let the young people see us being consistent.
Great. Well, please join me in giving a huge thank you to.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Please share the book with friends, too.
All right, let's help people to mention the book on social media, do all those things, and we'll try to find some time for you to come by and sign everybody's copy if you can.
Awesome. And write reviews on Amazon, too, if you can.
Okay, we will write reviews on Amazon.
Good or bad.
Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, everything, particularly the good ones. And have a great day. Safe travels back to Baltimore, Chris.
Thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye, guys.